Hello, and thank you everyone for joining this year's Tech Summit, Tech Summit 3 from CDI. We really appreciate you joining. And in this particular session, we're going to go over VMware's Cloud Foundation. I myself am Michael Colono. I am the Director of Data Center Solutions. And joining us today from VMware is Rick Walsworth. He is the Cloud Platforms BU, so that pretty much means any content you've seen from VCF or anything related to the SDDC is, his team's baby. So, make sure that, you drop him a line if you see something you like. Rick, you want to quick introduce yourself?
Yeah, appreciate that. Been here at VMware for 2 years now. Essentially, my team, as you say, runs everything that's outbound, so all the customer-facing content. But also, we work a lot. We spend a lot of time working with customers, analysts, and press to be able to essentially take that feedback back into the product team. So it really is a closed-loop system. Appreciate if anyone has any questions, put them down in the chat bar, and we'd be happy to answer those questions in real time. So looking forward to getting started. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, let's get started here. So as Michael said, essentially what we're going to do is provide just an overview of the Cloud Foundation solution. Obviously, it's a very strong product within our portfolio. It really takes in a lot of what we do together. But if you look at what's driving Cloud Foundation and some of the key drivers that we've seen, certainly through the pandemic, is, fact is that we've seen acceleration, a lot of companies that are essentially taking their transformation programs and accelerating to the next level. Obviously, it starts with the applications, and they're really trying to drive those application priorities. He said 90% of companies that were surveyed from Forrester actually prioritized their app transformation. But then you also have to look at the infrastructure. How do I transform my infrastructure at the same time? And it's no surprise that, per Forrester, they saw a 35% increase over their already high projections of what the cloud spend was going to be. But that includes private cloud. So you have to, when you think about cloud, it's not just essentially public cloud running into AWS, but it's the ability to be able to build cloud infrastructure as a way to be able to drive that. So a 35% bump over what they already projected from the standpoint of cloud spend. But if you look at it, as I said, it's really the ability to be able to start with those applications, modernize those applications, but then, not only the existing apps, but also taking net new apps, right? Since these are all the cloud native applications that are being brought in. And certainly containers are a big part of that. And we're seeing Kubernetes as a container orchestration platform really start to explode. So that's where we're starting to see a lot of our growth is in that space, bringing VMs and containers together. But it's the ability to not only do so I can run it within the data center, but then also extend out to the edge, and then certainly run that to cloud. So some of the core requirements we're seeing is that transformation across all of those boundaries and the ability to be able to drive, those new requirements, but also look at how do I make sure I maintain all the things that my customers count on from the standpoint of resiliency, right? I want to be able to make sure that whatever I do, the systems don't go down. Security. Obviously now with a lot of people working remote, the ability not only to secure the data center and the edge, it also now starts to extend out to what are those endpoints. So there are certainly solutions that exist for endpoint security, but then also from an operations standpoint, how do I streamline my operations to be able to make sure that it grows? But on top of that, there's always a set of complexities that are headwinds for these types of programs that are being brought in. And one of the things that we've seen as people were really trying to plan this out, they were trying to avoid building silos, right? Silos from a management standpoint, but also silos from the standpoint of security. What security mechanisms do I need to put in place? And as you start to look at what are some of the other complexities that start to introduce themselves, how do I take my existing applications, right? These are the applications that are essentially running the business today. How do I build those out and be able to modernize those applications so that I can now extend life out of those existing applications? But then at the same time, I've got a set of competing requirements because now I have a whole new set of new applications that are coming in, right? And these are typically the cloud native applications that are being driven specifically by containers and Kubernetes as an orchestration platform. But then now I want to be able to take those applications and be able to run those exact applications on-prem, at the edge, and in the cloud. And so that really, Michael, is where we're starting to see the requirements for this cloud operating model come in. Cloud is, it's not just a destination, it's really a mindset. How do I start to change my models in terms of how do I deploy these applications with a cloud mindset so that now I can extend those applications from the data center out, run them at the edge, run them in the cloud without having to refactor, without having to re-platform these applications. And so these are a lot of the things that we see our customers struggle with as they're starting to bring these in. And this is
And
really where Cloud
let
Foundation
me
comes
stop
in.
you real
Yeah,
quick. Sorry.
absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, really, the places where we've seen people even fail with those type of things is it's cultural. Like you said, it's completely a mindset. You know, whether it's DevOps in quotation marks or not, you know, it really comes down to being able to move in an agile way, whether it's the style or not, and taking a look at things appropriately and making sure that you understand that in this journey, you might fail with certain things, but that's okay.
Yeah,
You know, you just
exactly.
need the systems and process to get there.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's spot on, Michael. Spot on. And so really this is what's driving Cloud Foundation. And what Cloud Foundation, if you're not familiar with what Cloud Foundation is, it's essentially a solution that brings in a full stack hyperconverged infrastructure model, taking the best in breed products within the VMware portfolio. So certainly from a standpoint of management, we use a vRealize suite within Cloud Foundation to be able to provide full operations and automation within it. We use vSphere, obviously the king of compute virtualization. From a storage standpoint, we use vSAN as the core storage platform. But the other thing we do, we allow customers to leverage their existing investments in third-party storage, both as primary storage systems as well as secondary storage systems, and then networking. And so when we say full stack, it's really the ability to leverage those platforms. But the differentiator is that networking capability brought forward by NSX. And we've integrated NSXT within the platform, so it not only provides the advanced networking capabilities that you expect within an enterprise networking platform, but it also brings in some of those security mechanisms. Right now, I can take micro-segmentation as a way to be able to segment the network very effectively to be able to isolate workloads. And so when I'm talking full stack, it's really the ability to have that complete solution leveraged off that hyperconverged infrastructure as a way to be able to deploy these systems at scale within an enterprise environment.
Yeah, completely. I mean, what we're seeing at the executive level is, more and more, just like everything. The thing that we've seen for a couple of years is do more with less. You have less money, less people, these different things. And, you know, like the cliche, I guess I'm going to say is, it really is a foundation, but more than a foundation, it's a gateway to hybridity or even just ease of management. I mean, that's the thing is it has such a low operational overhead because some of the, fundamental aspects we're going to go through. But it's also a low barrier to entry. I mean, they're with consolidated management domains and things like that we're probably not going to get to today. But still, there's such a little barrier to entry that this can actually become that jumping off point for some of the things you did. And it's important to realize, like you said, with NSX, with microsegmentation, and this stuff becomes even more important as we get into containers and other aspects of this journey towards modernization.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And not only that, but when you think about it, a lot of times that could be overwhelming, right? For somebody that's
Yes.
maybe new to, network virtualization to be able to bring that on, the ability to be able to automate a lot of those capabilities. So I essentially define the rules once and then automate the deployment of it so that now every time I have a new workload deployed, it's deployed with that security stack that's built in. So it really provides that simplification, as you mentioned, Michael, as a way to be able to deploy it at scale.
And the joke always is the point of automation is to remove the human element.
Exactly.
What's more secure than removing humans from possibly making a mistake?
Yeah,
You have a
exactly.
validated automated deployment and you're good every time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And as I mentioned, when you look at the full stack, it's not just a collection of parts, right? Because individually, if you look at vSphere, obviously number one market share, from a compute virtualization by a mile, right? And over 400,000 customers have essentially bought into that. And now that we've essentially integrated Kubernetes as part of that stack within vSphere itself, it really does not only provide the ability now to bring containers in as a first-class citizen within a virtualized environment, but also provides essentially a new management domain, because now I've simplified management of very large, complex systems. I mentioned vSAN, right? Number one in terms of HCI out in the marketplace. NSX, over 18,000 customers on NSX. vRealize in terms of cloud management, number one across there. So if you look across the platform, it's essentially market-leading products across the board. But Cloud Foundation is more than just a collection of parts. It's really the ability to be able to take this as a completely integrated solution, automated with full stack security as part of that story.
Yeah, and it's funny. I actually happen to be one of the software-defined storage or HCI kind of SMEs here at CDI, and I'm always asked my confidence on software-defined storage. Whether it's whether it's VMware or the competitors.
Mhm.
And it's one of the things I always point to is VMware on AWS. I mean, would VMware stake an entire second category of their business on a technology they didn't themselves have faith in? So is software-defined storage something that's secure enough as a functional model to actually run your important workloads? The answer is yes. So if that's the foundation of of VCF and VMC, the answer is that simple. It does work and you can use it.
And that's a great setup to this next slide, Michael, because one of the things we knew was important in deploying these systems is to be able to make sure we've got a complete ecosystem for these products. So, if you look at what we can deploy on-prem, right, in terms of customer managed deployments, obviously VxRail, we've done a lot of work with the Dell EMC team in terms of being able to build a complete solution that's been jointly engineered with complete integration from SDC Manager within the Cloud Foundation stack all the way into the VxRail Manager. But that's not the only way you can deploy it, right? We've got a number of OEMs that deploy our systems on vSAN ready nodes. So these are essentially, certified products that are within our hardware compatibility matrix that provide essentially a complete solution out across there. But then now you also have other options, right? So those are what I can deploy on-prem. But now as I start to say, look, I need to be able to have essentially a service. I want to be able to move to much more of a software as a service model. Be able to do that. I can do that with the VMware managed solution, and these are the VMC, the VMware Cloud solutions that run either on AWS or on Dell EMC, or I've got a number of partner managed solutions that can be deployed out across there that I can leverage that across there. And this, Michael, is where that consistent operational model comes into play. Because now, if you think about it, out across here, what's that common stack? It is that software-defined data center. I've got the compute, storage, networking, and management out across there, but regardless of where this is being deployed, I now have the ability to be able to deploy at scale and make sure that my applications can be transported across any one of those destinations.
Yeah. Another fantastic part of really VCF is, we have a couple customers who are very strongly looking at VCF, but they're very storage centric.
Yep.
And one of the other things that VMware was smart about is stamping the certain Dell/EMC and also Pure products, and I'm sure more to come around that. So your workload domains can sit on a storage array if that's what you actually need, and kind of set up a pod architecture around these different things for right size, right technology for the right part of your solution.
Exactly. And that external storage is important for a couple reasons. First off, it provides investment protection, right? Because if I've got $1 million storage array sitting on my data center floor, I want to be able to take advantage of it. But also, you also have the ability to be able to tune workloads to specific, data types. And so that if I've got a high-end workload that I really need the performance, that low latency performance of a high-end Pure system or, a high-end storage array, I have the ability to leverage that as part of my overall solution. And the customers like that. It's not like we're forcing vSAN down their throats, right? They have the ability to leverage vSAN out in those management domains and leverage it where it makes sense. But if I do need to be able to tune it either for performance or for capacity, I have the flexibility to do exactly that. Cool. All right. So, we're often asked, okay, what are the use cases that really drive this? And what we're seeing right now is, falls into really three core columns. I can look at app modernization, and this is modernization of existing applications. So I can take a SQL or NoSQL database. I can essentially provide that cloud model within it, and now it gives me a lot of extensibility. And Michael, if you think about it, it's a lot of the same way where vSphere essentially took older NT and Windows applications and gave them an extra 5, 10 years of life by essentially just providing a modern infrastructure for it. It's that same model here. We're seeing a lot of drivers for that. On top of that, and certainly in with COVID, we've certainly seen the past 12, 14 months, we have seen a lot of customers move toward this distributed workforce. And as I do so, how do I turn up these VDI systems so that now they can scale pretty much on demand? I mean, we literally had customers that went from 10% of their workforce being remote to 90% of their workforce being remote. So they essentially had to turn on a dime to be able to scale their systems to be able to support those remote distributed workers. So the ability to integrate in with that Horizon stack to be able to provide a virtual desktop infrastructure that now provides the ability to scale and provide the security endpoints to be able to make sure that end to end, I've got those secure endpoints in there. That's that. And then the other thing we're seeing a lot of is that, cloud model, right? And whether it be building a private cloud so that now as an IT operator, I want to be able to operate much like a cloud provider within my data center, but then also be able to extend that into a hybrid cloud without having to change, reformat, restructure the data at all. I can essentially provide those models. So we're seeing, certainly around these three pillars, it's not limited to this, but we are seeing a lot of deployments that fall into one of these three use cases.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. And so if you take that first use case that I talked about, that app modernization, one of the things that we did with vSphere last year when we introduced vSphere with Tanzu is we took that Tanzu runtime service and the Tanzu management to be able to take a container management and orchestration platform, leveraging Kubernetes, and build it into the vSphere core. What that does now from a Cloud Foundation standpoint, it gives us the ability to leverage that underlying infrastructure. So now I can take essentially that virtualized infrastructure, but now I provide an additional layer of abstraction. What that abstraction does is it really bridges the gap between the developers and the IT operators. It now provides a model that is much more cohesive because I can't tell you how many customers I've talked to when they start to bring the cloud native folks on board internal within their own IT systems, the first thing they say is, all right, I don't want any trouble tickets. I don't want to have to talk to anybody. Just give me a set of APIs. Give me the ability to be able to run my YAML files and my kubectl commands as a way to be able to build that at scale. And that's exactly what we've done with Cloud Foundation with Tanzu. What we've done is we've actually taken that layer of abstraction now from the standpoint of now rather than assigning volumes and assigning resources from a compute networking standpoint, everything's essentially built into a service because that's what the developers expect. Now they can actually access all of these services through a set of APIs that gives them the ability to not only stand up a embedded runtime running within vSphere as part of Cloud Foundation, but also now gives me a set of automation and infrastructure services that I can use to be able to build my own clusters on demand without having to open a trouble ticket, without having to talk to anybody. I can essentially just build my infrastructure from code, get my code check-in done, and then move on to my next sprint.
Yeah, I think there's two important things there. And one, on the customer side, I think it's important to realize that, it's yet another thing that is being asked of the infrastructure. And people don't realize, like you mentioned on the previous side, like VDI, like you might have an end user computing department, but all their stuff is owned by an infrastructure team. Same thing for all these containers. They're asked to secure, support, and give capacity, let's say, for these containers, and they need a system or a bubble around it that is predictable and supportable. Yes, it's great. CDI ourselves, we're starting to support more and more open source tools, and tools are great. But full systems and operational platforms, that's tough. Do you really want to wait for someone on a message board to answer your question because your production's down? Not really. Second kind of thing there is, Tanzu selfishly for partners like us, we think this is a easy button for us too. We already had a very well-established VMware practice, automation practice around the full, vRealize suite. And we made the investment ourselves in terms of actually getting 5 people certified with the CKA designation, which is huge for us because our team of developers can even now more focus on those aspects. I mean, they were sitting there, like you said, YAML and Java and other things, pounding away at code anyway. Now this is a perfect platform for us to actually accelerate our customers' journeys through this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing we've seen, and this has been a positive, is that, from the IT ops standpoint, I don't need to be a Kubernetes guru, right? I essentially, I know vSphere, so I'm working within vSphere. My interface is through vCenter. So these are all familiar tools. But what we've done is we've empowered vCenter to now be that container orchestration platform within it. So now I've got namespaces. So rather than having to manage 1,000 containers and hundreds of VMs, I may now have a dozen namespaces that I could sign out to the users, let them do what they need to do, but I still have full control, right? Because that's the important part, is that all of the policies, all of the mechanisms I build in for security and for compliance, those are all built in to the construct of the namespace. So that as long as the developers are working within the namespace, they have everything they need. They've got the registries, they've got the libraries, they've got all the tools they need to be able to operate within the compliance guidelines that's maintained by IT. And essentially IT can get out of the way, which is really something very powerful when you look at trying to deploy these systems at scale. All right, let's move on. So, what's the outcome from this, right? We always try to look at what's important, what's the outcome from this? And, because we've talked with a lot of customers that have tried to stand up these systems from the ground floor. And, getting started a lot of times, building my first Kubernetes cluster, that's easy. But a lot of times it may take a couple days to stand up the infrastructure to be able to do so. We actually ran a series of tests. We actually ran through with a third party. They show that you can stand up from ground zero. In other words, from essentially bare metal. I can stand up that first system within a matter of hours. Once I have that up and running, now my first set of Kubernetes clusters are running within 30 minutes. And now I can essentially turn that over to my developers. Developers within a few minutes, they're now building their own clusters. And they're using all the same codes, right? Just as you said, they're using the YAML files, and they're essentially using the kubectl commands as a way to be able to build infrastructure from code within an ecosystem that they're familiar with. And that's something very, very powerful.
Definitely.
So you mentioned scaling earlier, and the ability to be able to start with a small 4-node architecture and a consolidated architecture, as you mentioned before. That's where a lot of our customers start. But then a lot of times you get boxed in, right? How do I scale? How do I grow from there? From a Cloud Foundation standpoint, it's really just a matter, I can go from a consolidated architecture to a standard architecture where I now take those workload domains and separate them from that management domain. And then as I scale out from there, I now add more workload domains into it. And then I can also scale clusters out. So this is really a model that allows you to be able to scale up, but then I can also scale out within that system. I mean, we have some of our largest customers today, are running hundreds of thousands of VMs within these systems, running across multiple instances on a geographically dispersed environment. But remember, you don't need to start that with that large of an infrastructure. I can start really small and provide the ability to be able to scale up very seamlessly as I grow.
Yeah, the thing that I always think that's funny is VMware did such a great job bringing one of their features back around. Resource groups really, or resource pools really faded into the background. People used it for VDI and other things, maybe even nested, environments for demos and stuff. Like partners like us. But it's funny how it came back around in this platform to really separate things out appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite honestly, a lot of that feedback came directly from the community, right? We got a lot of feedback directly from the community to be able to bring those back. The other area, and this is typically where a lot of customers do get hung up, is how do I simplify the day-to-day operations of these systems? And as we look at, we kind of break it into kind of three main buckets, right? Day zero, how do I get started, right? What from bare metal, as I said before, how do I get started to be able to turn my first systems up? So we can automate the deployment of those day zero operations in the fact that once I build that essential, the set of cloud commands in the beginning, it now provides the ability to build a very repetitive model to be able to do so. But then also automate all the day one provisioning. So all of my provisioning is now also automated from the standpoint of once I define my model in terms of what those workload properties look like, gives me the ability to be able to deploy this on an automated fashion. But where a lot of people always get hung up on is the day two operations, right? How do I manage the software lifecycle of this, what could be a very complex stack? And, I like it back 4 or 5 years ago when VMware first got started with this and started bringing software-defined data center out there. The original model was we essentially give you, a set of validated designs and then essentially allow the customer to essentially manage the infrastructure from there. And what we learned was that, day zero, day one, yeah, most people can get by that. Day two operations is where they always got hung up. How do I manage the life cycle of this, fairly complex stack on an automated fashion, especially when you're talking about, managing, thousands or hundreds of thousands in the case of some of our largest customers, deployments. And so as we look at this, it's really the ability to be able to I look at that SDDC stack on the right-hand side of this chart. And even though we're one company, the software releases come in different intervals, right? It's just the nature of the beast. And a lot of times there are dependencies between vSphere and vRealize and vSphere and NSX that you have to be able to pay attention to that. And that's where a lot of our customers in the early days got hung up. So what we've done is we've really taken a lot of that guesswork out of the equation by providing an automated stack that now provides the ability to be able to manage the life cycle of these individual components as a complete system. And that's really where SDDC Manager within the Cloud Foundation stack comes in. And the Lifecycle Management, or LCM of this, provides an automated framework that essentially takes that guesswork out of the equation on a very broad-based system. So I can now deploy these systems out at scale with the ability to be able to manage the lifecycle in such a way that what it does is that every time a new bundle comes out, you get a notification. There's a new bundle available. I get that notification. I can review the updates and say, is this right for me? Are these changes going to work for me? If it does, I can now schedule the updates. But here's the other thing, Michael, is that from the standpoint of scheduling these updates, we're not forcing customers to do everything at once. I can actually take a cluster, update a cluster on its own, or I can even go down into the individual workload domains and update those individual workload domains on a case-by-case basis. And the other thing is that if indeed, let's say a customer decide we're at 4.2 today, and they started at 4.0, and they decided not to do the 4.1 release for whatever reason. We're providing customers the ability to do skip level updates, so I don't have to go through every incremental change out along those ways. So this really simplifies how I deploy these systems at scale.
Yeah, lifecycle management is so important, whether it's, obviously hardware, it's always been a very important thing in terms of firmware and everything else, BIOS. It's so great to see people, VMware really paying attention to the intricacies and multiple dependencies when it comes to the software layer of even their own product. It's great to see.
Yeah, awesome. So let's switch gears here a little bit because I did mention security earlier, and it is something I wanted to pay specific attention to just because of the fact that it's so important, especially in today. If you look at this distributed workforce and the ability to be able to support remote workers, I not only want to be able to secure my infrastructure, but I also have to secure the workloads, and now I want to be able to secure those endpoints. And it really kind of drives around the ability to mitigate risk. So I want to be able to make sure that if I have any blind spots in my environment, I take those blind spots out. Obviously, from an IT standpoint, I'd be able to maintain my compliance. So I want to be able to not only make sure that I'm maintaining compliance with any corporate guidelines, but also the ability to go back and have an audit trail so I can go back and prove it, right? So that's one of the things that we built into the product itself. But you want to be able to do so without adding additional complexity. So to be able to simplify operations out across that full stack is very, very important. And if you look at it, from the standpoint of security infrastructure, and when we talk about full stack infrastructure, we really start at that management layer, the ability to be able to provide not only the governance and compliance that I talked about earlier, but also the ability to be able to make sure that all the way down to the container registries have the ability to be able to maintain that security profile. Obviously, within vSphere, we've got native encryption and native security built within vSphere that provides the ability to not only protect data at rest, but also data in motion, so that if I'm vMotioning VMs out across there, that data in motion leverages some of the vSAN capabilities that are built within vSAN as the ability to be able to provide high-level encryption of that data, both at rest and in flight. And then obviously NSX, provides, we mentioned microsegmentation earlier, so the ability to isolate workloads out across there. but I also have the ability to run VPNs and distributed firewalls in such a way that I can essentially eliminate any potential for east-west vulnerabilities. Because a lot of times that's what happens, is that somehow a hacker will get into your network, they'll sit there dormant for a while, and then they'll just start working east-west as a way to be able to penetrate the network vulnerabilities. What microsegmentation does is it isolates it into that, but then the distributed firewalls prevent any east-west traffic from providing an additional level of vulnerability. But on top of that, we have the ability to be able to add capabilities to it. So within the advanced security bundle, what VMware's done is we've taken the Carbon Black cloud as a way to be able to provide endpoint protection, mated that with the advanced load balancer that's built within NSX to be able to provide application firewall security, but then also leverage some of the native capabilities within for IDS and IPS for intrusion detection, intrusion prevention within NSX. And this is all tied together. So I have one console now that gives me the ability to manage all of these security endpoints from the infrastructure level all the way out to the endpoints.
Yeah, it makes sense. Obviously with everybody working remote, I think almost the joke is that, the hackers themselves have more time on their hands, right? So, more the question that most people or the statement most people really say is it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
Yep.
And we've seen more and more malware, like you said, it spends time doing discovery as much as it can before it infects anything.
Yep.
And if you kind of you create a choke point with east-west traffic, you limit your vulnerability for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So security is important. Obviously, from our standpoint, we're continue to provide enhancements to the security platform and make sure that we're protecting against any vulnerabilities out across there. Obviously from a customer deployment, even though Cloud Foundation's really only been in market about 4 or 5 years, we're just seeing phenomenal growth. Even through the pandemic, we've seen a tremendous amount of growth within the Cloud Foundation platform. And as you mentioned before, it's not only your very large, enterprise or large service provider customers. We're seeing deployments out across a number of industry segments from customers small and large, and they're all seeing benefits from it. From somebody as large as a T-Systems that has multiple instances deployed across multiple geographies, NTT Docomo, Porsche, they've all built upon that Cloud Foundation model. But even some of the smaller brands, right? Alchester Hospitals, Health New England, these are not large enterprise customers, but they've seen benefits from the ability to be able to start small, bring that cloud operating model in, and then deploy that at scale across there. So love to talk with you more about some of these customer case studies, but I know we're running up against time. So I did want to be able to make sure that we're kind of staying on schedule here, Michael.
Sure, definitely. Yeah. And, CDI's already had some successes with VCF as well. And like you said, we encourage everybody to reach out if you have questions, and, even if you need demos or things like that. So thank you once again, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you once again, Rick, for joining us and, going through all this information. I really appreciate it.
All right, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.